Hello, Shadowcat back, and today I want to talk about conflict. For reasons that are probably obvious to most of you. Anyone who's been even tangentially paying attention to the news knows what's going on over in Asia and Europe right now, or kind of the space between them, particularly between Russia and Ukraine. Although they're not the only actors in this, there's a lot of other nations that are involved over there. Belarus, Sweden, Finland. Japan's been involved a little bit because of a helicopter. If I recall correctly, there's a lot going on over there. But I don't actually want to talk about any of that. I mean, if you want to hear about what's going on between Russia and Ukraine and all those satellite countries, you can find that on any other channel. What I want to talk about today is conflict in general. Because right now, with what's going on over there, there's a lot of people on both sides of this coin. There are people who are saying that we need to go in and we need to end this. We should go in, shock and awe, and Lindsey Graham, senator in the U.S., just announced or said yesterday that, was it yesterday? Day before? I don't know. He said that Putin should be assassinated. And there's people on both sides of that one too. On the other side, you have people who are saying we should absolutely not be involved in this. Some people that are even saying we shouldn't even be doing sanctions. We should not be involved at all. Forget them, leave them be. And that's why I want to talk today about conflict. And this will apply not just to geopolitics and war and stuff like that, but this is going to apply to everything in your life. And I'm going to be drawing on logic and reasoning. I'm also going to be drawing on medicine and maybe a couple other things because it's very off the cuff. I'll add things as I go whenever I feel they're appropriate. And the reason I want to talk about conflict is because one of the things that people are struggling with right now, particularly in the West, in the Western democratic countries, whether that be Britain or Canada or the United States or any of these places, is that sometimes conflict is inevitable. And I say this. You can live a good life, okay? You can have a good job, a good family. You can do everything right. You can make all the right choices, plan ahead. But I want you to picture this. What if one day you're just off work, you're walking down the sidewalk, you're going to your car, whatever. You're walking down the sidewalk. And let's say that down the sidewalk there's somebody with a bat. Okay? Just a baseball bat. Picture whatever baseball bat you want. Wooden bat, metal bat, who cares? They're coming towards you and they have that bat raised and ready to swing. Okay? Now you know, it's kind of like when you get pulled over by the cops. When you see the cop car and you go by it, you know. So you see this guy coming and you know he's coming for you. Okay? And he's got that bat up and he's ready to swing. Now, you have a choice here. You have the option of talking to him. You could try to run, or you can prepare to fight. Now, when you see this person coming and you realize that they want to hit you, you don't know why they want to hit you. You don't know what the reason is, but you know that they do. And so their threatening posture means that you need to take an action because if you do nothing, you're getting hit. You could try to talk to them and say, "Hi, do I know you? Is there a problem here?" And if you take this action, maybe, you can slow them down, maybe start a dialogue, maybe you can talk them down from whatever they're doing. Maybe this is a whole misunderstanding, maybe he thought you were someone else, but maybe you can talk your way out of this. At the same time, though, while you might be able to talk him out of it, you also might not be able to, and the time spent talking is time not spent either preparing to fight or preparing to flee. And in doing so, spending your time talking, you may have actually just killed yourself. Because I guarantee, if someone's coming down and they're ready to take a full swing at your head with a baseball bat, you're not walking away from that one. So, you have to make a choice. You can talk, you can fight, or you can flee. Now, if you flee, you might get away. In fact, there is a better chance of you simply fleeing than talking. Because if you're talking, you're just standing still, and you know he's going to get to you. But if you flee, you might get away. Maybe you're faster than he is. Then again, maybe you're not. And we're talking about somebody with a baseball bat here. If they have the gun, then fleeing is out of the question too, because they could just shoot you. But we're not going to consider that. We're just going to consider the baseball bat. So you could flee. And if maybe walking had a 50-50, walking. Maybe if talking had a 50-50 chance of working, running might have a 75% chance of working. 25% chance that he can still catch you. You really want to take those odds. Now, what if instead you decide you're going to fight? Well, that's going to depend on how prepared you are to fight. I mean, if you have absolutely nothing, maybe you work an office job and you're walking down the street and all you have is a briefcase, well, you can maybe shield yourself with the briefcase a couple of times. However, if you're a concealed carrier, or maybe even an open carrier depending on where you are, you have the option now of a preemptive strike. You can fight back. You could simply pull your gun out, make a threat, or just shoot him, because at least in the United States, if somebody is threatening you with serious bodily injury or death, and somebody approaching you with a baseball bat raised to strike certainly is doing that, that's called self-defense. So you have the ability, hopefully, to end this before you come to harm. You may not want to. And you may actually regret it afterwards. You may be haunted by this for the rest of your life, as many people, many soldiers, many police officers, many security officers are. But in the moment, you have the option to end the conflict before it begins. And this is the crux of what I want to talk about today. The war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as Russia and many other nations, but I want to talk specifically about Russia and Ukraine for a moment. This was inevitable. If you ask the Russians, when they talk about Ukraine, they will say that this war didn't just start. Many of them will say this war started, I think they said 4 years ago, when the last election happened. I think it was 4 years ago. And it happened with the last election, whenever that was. And some of them will say it goes back even further. Some of them will even say it goes all the way back to the breakup of the Soviet Union. You know, the people who claim that just because the Soviet Union is gone does not make Ukraine independent. It's kind of the same way China feels about, well, practically every nation in the Southeast Asian area. They say that Ukraine and several other nations belong to Russia. And so this entire thing has just been one very long uprising that needs to be put down. Either way, this has been coming. And anyone who knows even a little bit about history could see that it was coming. Many people have been trying to predict when it's going to happen because they knew that it would, and they've been trying to prepare for it. The point is, though, it was inevitable. Someday, Russia was going to try and take Ukraine. And we knew this was going to happen because back under the Obama administration, Russia came through and took Crimea. Russia said, look, Crimea is ours. The world at large said, no, Crimea is Crimea. It's not part of Russia. Okay, they are their own entity. And Russia said, yeah, no, it's ours. And they went in and they took it. And many people, when that happened, asked the question, well, okay, they just took Crimea. When is Ukraine going to be next? Turns out it took several years, but inevitably, it was next. And now that they are actually taking Ukraine, you have many people that are talking about World War III and when this is going to happen. The reason I want to bring all of this up is because some things are inevitable. We knew this was going to happen. And maybe it wasn't going to be Russia. Maybe the inevitable conflict was going to be started by China. Maybe it was going to be started by Afghanistan. Sooner or later, somebody, more than likely somebody over in the Asian continent, was going to start this. Why? Well, because as somebody once said, history may not repeat, but it rhymes. These things keep happening, and we have a historical record of them. How many times have the nations over there fought wars of aggression trying to take territory? It's just what they do. Knowing that, it means that we can prepare. Now, we did a lot of these preparations back after World War II. After World War I, we destroyed Germany. Okay? The Treaty of Versailles was probably regarded as one of the worst things we could have done after World War I. At the time, it was understandable. I mean, that was how wars worked. The loser had to finance the repairs for the damage done during the war. What we had never had, though, was a war of that scale, and when we put that on Germany as the principal responsible actor in World War I, we destroyed Germany. That meant that there was really only one thing that Germany could do, and that was they had to rebuild. So they shifted their entire focus to becoming an industrialized country again into production so that they could pay off the Treaty of Versailles and then work on rebuilding their own country. Now, as we all know, afterwards, when they became an industrial juggernaut, well, some bad people came into power, and they did some things which actually led to some actions of appeasement where Germany was allowed to take certain nations and certain lands because people thought that, well, Germany is just trying to rebuild, and if we let Germany take these nations, they'll be satisfied and they'll stop. In case you didn't read your history books, here's a spoiler alert. Germany didn't stop. And it's because of that that we got World War II. Germany took several lands that I can't name off the top of my head right now before they started moving into larger nations like Poland and France. Again. So now, like I said, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Instead of talking about Germany, we're talking about Russia. Russia is almost a carbon copy of Germany. Now, granted, I don't think Russia ever really had the same kind of industrial power that Germany did. I know they did have a lot. I mean, look at their armored divisions during World War II, and you can see that when it came to building things, Russia was pretty good at it. And then Russia became the Soviet Union, and we had the Cold War for 30 years, 40 years. I don't know exactly how long. Doesn't really matter. And then the Soviet Union fell apart. When the Soviet Union fell apart, that basically devastated Russia. And so Russia has been doing everything they can to scrabble them back into being a superpower. For a long time, the thing that really kept them as a superpower was their nuclear stockpile, which is a respectable stockpile to be sure, but it was about the only thing they had going for them. But they're not what they were when the Soviet Union fell. More or less. There's some reports that are coming out lately that are showing maybe they're not that well off, but they've gotten stronger. And now what are they doing? Well, they're expanding, and they said, you know what? This territory was ours. We're taking it again. Just like Germany did. And so now we have to look at history and look at Russia and say, you know, we've seen this one before. Last time we did nothing, and we ended up with a global conflict. And here's where I talk about the inevitabilities of conflict. We knew that this conflict was coming. So the question is now, what do we do about it? With the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of wisdom. If we were to do nothing right now, there are many people who say, we let Russia take Ukraine, and perhaps Russia will be done, okay? Russia will have Ukraine, Russia will have Crimea, they will have this straight shot right into the ocean, and we'll be done. To that, I have a question. Why would they stop? This is a question I try to get people to ask a lot. When you're asking a why question or a why not question, and you cannot come up with an answer, my advice to people is you always ask the opposite question. So when people are saying, why would Russia invade another nation after they take Ukraine, my question in turn to them is, why wouldn't they? They've already shown that they have the capability of going in and taking a nation. They've already shown that if they threaten people enough with nuclear weapons, nobody will stop them. Why would they stop there? Just out of the goodness of their hearts? The generosity they'd like to show the world? Well, if they were going to do that, why would they have invaded the first nation in the first place? This is a war of aggression and a war of territory. And if you can take some territory, why not take more territory? This is just tactics and logic. That's why many people are looking at Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. Also Belarus, but for all intents and purposes, Belarus seems to be already under the control of Russia anyway, so we'll just call that one already conquered as far as I'm concerned. Why would they stop now? If you're successful, why would you stop? And it's funny, the people that I hear making this argument saying we don't want to get involved, we shouldn't get involved, because maybe Russia doesn't do anything, these also happen to be the same people who are very much against corporations and monopolies. So, if you're one of these people, let me ask you this. Why didn't Walmart stop after building 100 stores? Why didn't Amazon stop after breaking $1 billion? Why do you expect people to just stop? It's a bit like saying, yes, you have a world record breaking sprinter, and they have beaten the world record time at the 90-meter mark. Why would they not go the full 100 meters? It's like, nope, they're already fast enough. They're just going to stop at the 90-meter mark and go home. Good race, everybody. Good race. It's stupid. It's stupid and it's naive. That's why when we look at what Russia is doing, we say, these people are in danger, these nations. Because unless there is a reason for them to stop, they're not going to. It's the same reason why people are very concerned right now about China and Taiwan. China right now is watching this conflict and watching the world's response to it very carefully. Because China wants Taiwan. They have always wanted Taiwan. They have always been afraid, however, that an attempt to take Taiwan could result in international conflict, and war is to be avoided when it can be. And right now, China can. But if Russia is able to take Ukraine, if Russia is able to officially annex Belarus, why can't China take Taiwan? And if no one was stopping Russia, they're not going to stop China either. And this is why I talk about the inevitabilities of conflict. As soon as there is an opening, China's going to do it. It may not be today. It may not be tomorrow. It may not be this year. It might not even be this decade. But that's just the thing. They're patient. They're waiting. They have wanted Taiwan for years already. Maybe even decades. I don't know. I'm not that familiar with Asian history. But they've wanted it for a long time. That hasn't changed. Why would you expect it to change now? It's not going to. They're biding their time and they're waiting. So, when we talk about the inevitabilities of conflict and we look at things like this, now we are not part of that. Yet. But as we learned in World War II, if you're not involved in the beginning, that does not necessarily mean that you won't be later on. Granted, if you're the Congo or you're South Africa, you're probably not going to be involved at all. I mean, they haven't been involved in a lot of wars as far as I know. Again, not a historian, not exactly up on my African history either, but I know that there was a conflict up in Egypt and the other northern African states. Pretty sure southern African states weren't really bothered. The US also felt the same way. And in World War II, after getting done with World War I, we saw what was going on in Europe and said, nope, don't want any of that. We did that. That was bad. Don't want any more of that. And we said, we are staying out. Until we weren't. And why was the US getting involved? Because we were attacked. And after that, we said, well, we're in it now. Because sometimes, much like the man with the bat on the sidewalk, you don't get to avoid conflicts. Sometimes the conflict comes to you. You can't avoid it. You can only deal with it as it comes. This is also the reason why I'm trying to get people to understand that they're looking at Ukrainians and what they're doing in this fight against Russia, and there's a lot of complaints. There's complaints about the people who are doing the fighting, the methods they're using to do the fighting, and my simple answer to them has been, there are no rules in war, and there are no civilians in war. And I do mean that in a practical sense, not necessarily a literal sense. In a literal sense, obviously, civilians do exist. You're going to have your uniformed soldiers, and you're going to have civilians. But in a practical sense, when it's your country that's being bombed, when it's your country taking missile strikes, and especially when your enemy, either for reasons of incompetence or malice, doesn't seem to be able to differentiate very well between military targets, logistical targets, and civilian targets, there are no civilians in war. The fact is that if you're a civilian in a war, it doesn't mean you're not a target. You can still be killed just as easily as anyone else. And you may as well go out fighting instead of cowering. Because when they come, they're going to regard you the same way regardless. That's a bit of a tangent, though, that I don't want to get on. The original point that I wanted to say is that when it comes to you, you don't get a choice. And so, in order to better adapt and respond to the threat, it is better to be proactive. Now, that doesn't mean that you run in, you rush in, and don't think about what you're doing first. I mean, if you're the person on the sidewalk and you see somebody with a baseball bat raised to strike, maybe the best thing to do isn't to charge him head first. Just saying, probably a bad idea. But it does mean that you can be proactive. If you're armed, show that you're armed. Display that you're armed. Pull that gun out, aim it, and if you feel the need to, fire it. Or if you have nothing and you need to flee, then, yeah, go ahead and flee if you have to. You may not get away, but at least, you're doing something. Right now, we have the opportunity to be proactive. I'm hearing a lot of people in the world that are talking about things like sanctions. And as far as I know, Russia has essentially been cut off from the entire world. The problem with sanctions and protest in general, which I was going to do a video on, but this one seems more important right now, is that protest only works when you have somebody who cares enough about you to respect your protest. That's why protest nowadays doesn't work, and I'm not going to go off on this tangent, but the reason why protest in general doesn't really seem to work anymore is because no one really cares about the people that are in the protest. For example, I'm going to bring up two of them. They're going to be two controversial protests, and if you don't like my opinion on the protests, then you are free to unsubscribe and go somewhere else. But I'm going to bring up two of them. Black Lives Matter and the Freedom Convoys. Both of them have been called protests. Both of them have also been called acts of aggression. Now, Black Lives Matter was called a protest. Black Lives Matter and all of its various protests across the United States, across Canada, across England, and all over the world have done in the billions of dollars in damage between destruction of property, between arson, between looting, and the damage done to people themselves. That is, medical costs for both civilians and security forces that were involved. The protest literally leveled entire city blocks. However, the Freedom Convoys, to the best of my knowledge, have done nothing more than economic damage by blocking roadways. Now, that economic damage, depending on who you talk to, could be significant, but there's been no destruction of property, no arson, no violence. Well, none from the protest itself, at least, but that's a different tangent. And what did it gain anyone? Well, the Black Lives Matter protests made significant social and political change. I mean, laws have been passed regarding the demands of Black Lives Matter. Streets have been renamed. Statues have been torn down. There has been great change because of that. Whereas the convoys have gotten almost no change. The convoys have actually managed to change a few things in a superficial way. But when you look at what they've actually achieved, and since I happen to be familiar with it, say the laws in Alberta, Canada, the laws are not changed at all. For example, in Alberta, Canada, they pulled back their mask mandates for every place except for trains and hospitals. And as I've explained to some people, this on its face sounds like progress. But when you look at the core of it, the fact that the masks are still required in trains and hospitals means that the minute that there is a reason, the minute there is another emergency, whatever that emergency may be, the trains and hospitals can be used as legal precedent to expand those mandates again to everything once more. It's leaving the door open. And so, in essence, nothing has really been achieved except a minor appeasement to the protesters. The reason being that the violent protest got support and got change, primarily because it was violent. It wasn't necessarily that anyone really cared that much about the protest itself. They wanted to stop the violence. Whereas the other convoy, which was largely peaceful and not destructive, achieved nothing. Because no one, again, cared about the protest. They just wanted it to go away. And since the protest was not destructive, a gesture was enough to simply disperse it in general, until they actually came through and pushed the people out violently. Again, different tangent for a different video. I covered that to talk about the sanctions currently being levied against Russia, and what they say we should be levying against China and many other bad actors. This is not a bad move, but you have to understand, as Russia is displaying right now, they don't care. They do not care about Western values. They do not care about Western people. They don't care about Western money. And they don't care about Western policy. What they do care about is serving their own nation. And thus, all of the sanctions in the world are not going to stop it. All of the denunciations in the world, all of the condemnations of the world will do nothing, because they're literal words on paper that mean nothing to that nation. Again, I want to get back to the inevitability of conflict. When you have somebody, much like that person coming down the sidewalk with the bat, who doesn't want to listen to words, they don't care, that option is now off the table. So we can no longer do that. The sanctions, they don't work. Negotiations, doesn't work. We tried peace talks. The peace talks fell through. They're not interested in peace. And while I know I'm referencing Russia a lot, this will apply to any aggressive actor, in any theater, in any war, in any conflict. If they're not interested in peace, you cannot negotiate for peace. They don't want it. So what about fleeing? Well, in my sidewalk example, you could flee. That is an option. However, if you're a nation, it's not really an option. Now granted, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, they did evacuate a lot of people. Some people did flee. That's understandable. People have always do that. If you can't fight and you can't survive, you get out. But the nation itself can't do that. And those people who fled, the refugees who went to other countries in Europe, know full well that there very well may not be anywhere to go back to. They may have lost everything. Their possessions, their home, their nationality, their identity. They have literally become non-persons if their country disappears. They are now stateless and floating around until somebody takes them in. And somebody will. Humanity isn't all bad. They will find a new home and they will be able to start over somewhere. I'm not going to say it's going to be a great life, but it will be life. But there's nothing you can say that's going to stop this. And they can't flee. So what does that leave? Well, that leaves the inevitability of conflict. Russia is going to take Ukraine if it is at all possible. And when they do so, as I stated earlier, you have to ask yourself, why would they not try and take someone else? And to be honest, there are reasons why they wouldn't. Russia is finding out that taking Ukraine is a lot harder than they thought it was going to be. Their troops are not the super soldiers that they had back in World War II. And calling them super soldiers in World War II is a bit of a stretch, but the point is, they're not the army they once had. From what I understand, their mechanical divisions are also not what they were. And they were pretty bad to begin with. Russian tanks had a nasty habit of going into the European theaters with like a 25% to even 50% failure rate. Now, they got around this by fielding them by the thousands, so that even if only half of them made it, they still vastly outnumbered anything that Germany was fielding, even though German tanks were generally regarded as being much better. It doesn't matter when they're taking 10 shells at once. Their current armored divisions, however, seem to be much more lackluster. And then there's just general Russian morale, which it's hard to gauge that because of the fog of war. News coming out from this theater is not great, and most of it has been shown to be false, but they just don't seem to really have the heart to do it. I mean, no one in Russia lives very well, even the military, and it's kind of hard to start a war, or fight in a war rather, when your own life is just kind of miserable. I don't know if Russia's going to take them anyway. I suspect that they still can, and I suspect that they will. But I think they're finding out that maybe they were not the military power that they thought they were. So perhaps they look at these other smaller nations and say, is it worth starting another conflict? Maybe not. But that's their own choice. And that's based on logic and reasoning. If they feel that they can, however, then they literally have no reason not to. Nothing that NATO can say, nothing the United Nations can say, nothing the United States can say is going to change that. They'll do it. And so that leaves us. Now, we may not be involved now, but I want you to picture a scenario here. What if Russia was able to take Ukraine? So now they have Ukraine and Crimea. What if they were also able to take the Eastern Bloc and the Baltic states? So they can take Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. They already have Belarus. What if they are able to go up into the Scandinavian countries and take Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark? Just take all of them and add them to the new Russian Empire. What if Russia also goes through and takes Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and all of those other countries over there? Maybe, after a few years, maybe a couple of decades, Russia finally does the impossible and takes Afghanistan. I mean, they've tried before. Didn't work, but maybe someday they manage it. What if there is this entire, now massive Russian Empire? And what if, because the United States and the United Nations didn't stop them then, what if China decides that they're going to take Taiwan? And then after Taiwan, they take Cambodia, Vietnam. What if they go after Japan? And South Korea? And Malaysia? Malaysia? I think that's down there. What if they turn their eyes on India? Imagine a future where the Asian continent, and perhaps even Oceania, are split in half, with the northern half, the northwestern half, belonging to Russia, and the southeastern half, all the way down to Australia, belonging to China. What happens then when Russia says, we're moving into Europe? Russia decides they're going to take Poland and Germany and the rest of the European nations. How do you stop them then? Because we already established that now they're not going to listen to words, okay? They don't care about your negotiations. They're not interested in peace. You can't sanction them because now their new empire is economically stronger than yours is. Especially given the ties with China, maybe, and if China decides to cut off the rest of the world. Because if China can take the entire southeast region of Asia, as well as Oceania and Australia, that would make them an empire to be reckoned with. And China is already to be reckoned with. So what do you do then? Now, you're not worried about somebody walking down the sidewalk with a bat. Now, you're worried about a soldier walking down with body armor and grenades and rifles and handguns and everything, so that you no longer have the option to run, you no longer have the option to negotiate, and you have absolutely no chance in a fight. Because you had an inevitable conflict coming, and you ignored it. And this is where I wanted to bring up the medical example that I keep giving to people. Russia right now is a cut. Okay? It's serious, but it's not going to kill you. All you have to do with a cut is clean it, cover it, and you'll be fine. there is always going to be a slight chance of infection, and perhaps it exacerbates and gets worse. But if you tend to it, that chance goes down significantly. Just like if we deal with Russia right now, the chance for greater conflict after this goes down significantly. But what if you ignore that cut? What if you just say, it's a cut. I'm not going to bother with it. Then perhaps you get an infection. And perhaps the infection spreads. So instead of just a cut, now you have an infection that has spread to the surrounding tissues and the muscle underneath. Now it's worse. It can still be treated, but you're going to need medicine to do so. You're going to need a lot of it, and it's going to take longer to deal with it. Similarly to if we let Russia take many nations and become a stronger industrial and military power, we may still be able to beat them. But it will take many more people, many more guns, it will cost us more lives on both sides, and it will take us longer to deal with it. And if you ignore the infection, it becomes gangrene. And gangrene can and often will kill you. Just like if a Russian empire became strong enough to overpower superpowers in the nation. That doesn't mean that they are invincible, but it does mean that they can destroy you. And will, given the chance. Now, with a gangrenous injury, depending on where it is, perhaps you can treat it. Perhaps you can amputate it and simply say, you know what? I can't win this fight. Here, I cut this off and I give it to you so that the rest of me may live. Perhaps when Russia comes to the U.S., they invade the eastern seaboard or the western seaboard. Either one, I don't know. Don't care, doesn't matter. Either way, they invade and we simply draw a line and say, Russia, you are allowed to keep that. Leave me alone. And maybe they stop there. The thing about gangrene, though, is when you cut the limb off, it can't leave the limb and come and get you. But Russia could. Or China could. Or any other actor who rises up in military power. That is why when conflict comes, you must deal with it. If it was not Russia, if it was somebody else, I would be saying the same thing. Is it being the world police? Yes, it is being the world police. America being the world police. But you don't want America to be the world police? Fine. How do you feel about police in your own town? Would you like the police in your own town to just say, you know what? Some people here don't like us being the police, so we're just not going to police. You're on your own now. Everyone's on their own. Now, there's places where that would probably be an upgrade. It would probably be a benefit. But in general, most of us like having police and the rule of law. We like the fact that we don't have to go out every day wondering, is somebody going to try and murder me simply because no one's going to enforce murder laws if they try? No. We like having police. And whether the world admits it or not, having a superpower like the U.S., who can come in and stop conflicts, is a benefit. Which is why we should be doing that right now. We can stop this now. We can. And not just the U.S. If every single nation in the world were to come together and not just condemn Russia for what they're doing, but to say, look, this is a warning. Either you cease your aggressions, or every nation in the world is going to come down and invade you and destroy your nation. The war would be over. And people say, yes, Russia has nukes. Well, that's fine. Many other nations in the world have nukes too. If nukes is what it's going to come to, then let it come to that. I explained to somebody else, the fact that Putin came out and announced that anyone who gets involved will be nuked, and saying that we have to stay out of this because he might do it. I told them this. There is a logical fallacy called the appeal to authority, where in an argument you declare that this argument is right simply because it came from somebody in a position of authority. Now, just for extra hilarity, if you like an example of this in action, just look at anything Dr. Fauci has said. But not touching that one. No, the appeal to authority says that because somebody holds a position, that makes them right. It's a fallacy because even people in positions of authority can be wrong. The fact that Putin is threatening the world with nukes, and that we should not act because he's threatening us with nukes, I'm going to say, or I'm coining this one, okay? Trademark me. It is the appeal to aggression. It is saying because somebody is more aggressive, we must do what they say. Okay. I mean, if you really want to do that, then we're basically going back to the days of Attila the Hun. Might makes right, and whoever is mightiest, whoever has the biggest stick, makes the rules. Because they might use the stick. Is that really the kind of world you want to live in? No, that is a fallacious argument, and I'm not going to entertain it. Now, the response that I got to that was great, and they said, or I made to them the argument and said, well, I guess if I gave Trump a nuke, then you couldn't insult Trump. No more disrespecting Trump because he has a nuke. And they said, well, Trump's not insane. Which I guess depending on who you ask, that answer might change. But they said, Putin is absolutely insane. I said, oh, I see. So we're not necessarily doing an appeal to authority or aggression. We're doing an appeal to insanity. Whoever is most crazy makes the rules, because crazy person might use stick. Again, we can't live like that. That is a fallacious argument. Am I saying that right? I feel like I'm not saying that right. Regardless, you know what I'm saying. These are not arguments. This is not logic. The fact that he has threatened the entire world basically means he's trying to hold the entire world hostage. And I'm going to wrap this up by quoting the first rule of any prisoner. The first rule of any prisoner is escape. And if Putin is going to hold the world prisoner, then it is our duty to escape. And if we have to kill our jailer to do so, then we must. Because not doing so is going to lead to further aggression, further bloodshed, and a much darker future. So, these are things that I just wanted to get off my chest because there's been a lot going on and there's a lot of people making some very bad arguments for it. So, if you happen to hold some of those bad arguments, okay, I'm going to rephrase that. If you're holding some of those opposing arguments and you want to tell me how I'm wrong, do so in the comments. I look forward to the discussion down there because I've been having those discussions for days now. And I'll take all of them that come my way. If you agree, let me know what you agree with. Because that's good too. Always good for the interaction. And otherwise, if you know somebody else who also could use the benefit of my wisdom here, share this video with them. Maybe they won't even listen to it, but you know what? It takes 5 seconds to share a link, and if they listen to it and change their opinion, great. If not, nothing's really lost. By the way, if you're not subscribed to this channel, I'm trying to do more of these direct messages, and if you like this, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon so you're here for every video when they come out. Don't forget to leave a like, please leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time for whatever message I happen to have. And until then, take care.